In my last video, I brought up the hot coffee incident involving Richard Dawkins and Rebecca Watson, both professional skeptics, but from different spheres, meaning that Dawkins skews a bit conservative and isn't a fan of feminism, and conversely, Rebecca Watson is a little more in the atheism plus direction in terms of her feminist leanings and her position as a prominent skeptic. The story is relatively old news at this point on YouTube, but I'm gonna scrape over some of the vague details really quick, which is basically that Richard Dawkins was attending a function, an atheist function, I think, where he and Rebecca Watson were both speaking, and he propositioned her for sex with some lame come on about her coming back to his apartment for coffee. And there was a bunch of controversy that popped up with the usual sides all banging heads against each other. The anti-SJ skeptics, blamed everything on feminism, and there was a whole a hate campaign against Rebecca Watson that she's still recovering from today. I follow her on Twitter, and every so often she just kind of checks in on her Twitter account and checks in on her YouTube account, and it's just complete dog shit. A bunch of misogynist, nasty trolls, Gamergate types, vomiting into her comment section. There's a male entitlement element to the outrage in that story. I think that there's a lot of surrogate outrage, surrogate misogyny, in terms of that moment where Dawkins was very pickup artisty and rejected was too close to home for the people who were really pissed off about it in the dude bro skeptic community that still, Thunderfoot and those people are still pissed off about it and use that as a plank against the idea of feminism and atheism coming together, because look, this isn't compatible. They aren't going to accommodate us because apparently male sexual entitlement is a bedrock principle of atheism. So what came to mind when recalling that incident in the last video was this letter, this highly patronizing letter that Richard Dawkins wrote in the aftermath of that event, called Dear Muslima, which was the beginning of this idea in the male-skewed skeptic community, male-favoring skeptic community. I'll say that because there are people in that community that are female that are also very anti-feminist. Sorry. The Dear Muslima the Dear Muslima letter basically was a letter to a theoretical Muslim girl from Richard Dawkins, explaining sarcastically the problems of first world feminists to this girl who lives under third world Islamic Sharia law. So she is living under explicit rather than de facto misogyny and rape culture. I know. You're exhausted. I know that certain people watching this video are probably exhausted of hearing that term, and I know who those people are. And I just want to make clear that there is nuance to the idea of rape culture, right? So the The rape culture in Saudi Arabia is not, under a Wahhabist government, for example, is not the same as it is in America, but don't get it twisted. There are pockets and tiers of rape culture within America. That being said, it started this war of words regarding the suffering of first world versus third world women, as if using using third world progressive causes to debunk first world progressive causes isn't new. I remember that Fox News and Sean Hannity, when the conversation about income inequality came to the forefront during the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations around 2010. There were a lot of articles on Fox News and Fox Business comparing the quality of life of first world poor people to third world poor people. So there was a bunch of really trolly references to you guys got it so good, you American poors. You American poors, you have air conditioners, you American poors. You American poors all have refrigerators, all these kind of bullshit, nonsense. You got paved roads, kind of arguments. It's not a sincere progressivism, meaning that implement your progressive policy just far away from here. Like, why are you guys sweating this? It's the same with the idea of the progress of Black Americans. It's kind of like, you guys aren't slaves anymore. Why aren't you millionaires? What do you mean you're oppressed now? Jim Crow's over. It's an extremely disingenuous comparison to tell a first world worker not to sweat their problems because they're not working for Foxconn in China. That's completely out of context. Completely out of context. How far does the money? I mean, let's just do a basic one-to-one. Somebody working in a Foxconn factory making iPhones in China, 21 hours a day with no sleep and suffering in bondage, living, they lock these workers in a lot of the times. They're living basically as slaves and making, $1 a day, $2 a day, something like that. That's probably the high end of it. No one's saying that those people don't need help and what's happening to them is not a grotesque injustice. But in the United States of America, just because some people in the working class or below into the extreme end of poverty have some very minor creature comforts does not mean that they are living better in the context of America with the very little that's been given to go around in terms of low wages and a very weak social contract, social safety net. So first world feminism being pitted against third world feminism and the condescension of Richard Dawkins in that Dear Muslima letter. As usual, Dawkins set the tone within the male atheist community, the male anti-SJ community. I land on that because there are male atheists who are pro-SJ, like me. But predominantly in terms of the loudest voices within the male atheist community online, in social media, and on YouTube, it's very dude bro. So I just wanted to take a moment to examine this weird threshold for progressivism within the right wing on income inequality and within the right wing of the left, which is the libertarian leaning atheist and skeptical community that, they're progressive on economics because they back Bernie Sanders, but they're not progressive on social issues per se, meaning that they're comfortable with gay marriage, but that's conservative at this point. At this point, that's a conservative position. The repeal of gay marriage is a regressive position because the existing order already includes gay marriage. So being pro gay marriage is not necessarily a progressive stand at this point because mission accomplished. So what am I saying? I want to start a conversation within the atheist community about qualified progressivism and wondering and questioning why. I don't need to people can give their own reasons. I have a theory about the first world versus third world progressivism thing. And it is very rooted in that example on Fox News of the answer to income inequality being, you got it so good compared to the third world, and simultaneously now that same idea being applied as a response to progressives on gender equality, which is, look, the third world's so fucked up. The first world, you guys got it made. You got it made. You're the boss. I mean, I've heard MRAs go on about, women are in charge. Sargon of Akkad will scream about how universities are a feminist system and all these different feminist systems where women are empowered. It's kind of just because someone is in an administrative position doesn't necessarily mean they have power. In the most immediate sense, sure. I mean, they have participatory authority, right? But power is something much more complex and in a way intangible. So who's funding the university? The patrons of the university have a lot more power than the administrators, for example. And I guarantee that the majority of patrons, wealthy patrons supporting American universities, are not feminists and not women. So, first world versus third world. I have considered the fact that it's much easier to be progressive in the Dawkins way. It's easy for a misogynist like Dawkins, who thinks he's entitled to sex, to write that Dear Muslima letter, because he is pointing out an injustice being perpetrated by someone else. He's not owning his own misogyny. He's saying, don't pay attention to me. This other guy is doing it worse. And it, to me, that's very weaselly and disingenuous and childish and churlish. He's supposed to be a grown man. I mean, Richard Dawkins is elderly. He set the tone for all these videos about don't sweat it, like, oh, how come you progressives don't care about the atrocities and it's part and parcel to Islamophobia, right? Because the Dawkins and his crew, they're Islamophobes. So whenever you face them with American gender problems, they are always going to point to Islamic nations because they want to shift the argument into Islam's the problem. So I just kind of want to get the ball rolling within the American justice conversation with atheists about being progressive where you can actually do something about it. And I know that, unfortunately, the place where you can do something about it is going to involve you surrendering some of your privilege. It takes courage to be progressive in a situation where you have to actually sacrifice for the cause. It takes no courage whatsoever and an incredible amount of bad faith to pit two marginalized groups against each other. That's repulsive. Rhetorically repulsive. And additionally, to argue for justice in a situation where you can't be held accountable. That's very, very easy to do because, you're vilifying someone many thousands of miles away, and in a way you're canonizing their victims because you're off the hook. You can always sort of put forward, well, I can't do much, but point out what's going on, right? You can't do much to improve their situation. From the first world to the third world, you can't really do much. I mean, you protesting for reforms in the third world is going to be a lot less effective than doing it here. So let's play the game at home before playing it abroad. Let's play the local finals and nationals, the qualifying rounds before going to the Olympics of social justice.